No one knows the story of Erin Patterson better than the Australian's Ellie Dudley. Ellie, you were in court for every minute of her trial. You might be in court for every minute of her appeal, if and when it makes it to court. As the year came to a close, what were you thinking about the whole Erin Patterson story?
Well, she's in prison now. She's likely going to be in prison for the rest of her life. And then what she left? She's left in her wake a family that's been completely torn apart. Often with these stories, while this one in particular had such a humongous impact on Australia and globally, it garnered so much attention. There's a family that's sitting there now. They're trying to rebuild their lives, not least having lost 3 members of their family, but also having this media storm around them that has completely torn up their lives. They've had a trial now. They've still got an appeal to come. How do you move on from that? I think those are the things that are going through my brain.
During the trial, in various victim impact statements after the verdict, in fact, the family spoke quite emotionally about the impact that the publicity had had on them. They talked about not liking the fact that journalists were in their local cafe, that journalists knocked on their doors. But up close to that story in Morwell during the trial and around Leongatha, did you get a sense that they were actually being harassed by journalists?
I didn't get the sense of that at all during the trial. There's something quite surreal about going to the local cafe right near the court and getting your bacon and an egg roll before you go into court that day, and Ian Wilkinson is there in line in front of you. I don't think I ever saw a journalist approach him. Whether or not there were journalists who were rocking up to their homes at other times or trying to get comments from them in the wake of the sentence, that's an entirely different thing. But I would say that the journalists were incredibly respectful of the justice process in that, and also the mourning process of the people closely involved in this tragedy, in not overstepping.
As always in trials, there's a huge period of suspense and of not knowing and of wondering how the verdict is going to go. And then once you have a verdict, you only get a very short time to sort of clap eyes on the accused and try to understand how they've processed it and regard them, in her case, as now a convicted murderer. When she returned to court for sentence hearings and then ultimately for sentence, how were you thinking about Erin Patterson now that she is, of course, convicted?
I think that when covering the trial, seeing her sitting up the back of the courtroom in her sort of, very maternal-looking blouses and, she just sort of looks like a mum who stumbled into court and somehow is sitting behind a pane of glass at the back of the courtroom with guards either side of her, right? But then you see her rock up to court being transported in the back of a prison van after she's been convicted, being handled by prison guards. She's clamped with handcuffs, and then she's coming in, and there's something, all of a sudden, there's this sinister side to her where this woman who appears to be so unassuming and just a suburban housewife from the Gippsland region of Victoria, all of a sudden you think, well, this woman is a mass murderer. This woman planned an incredibly deliberate, sinister attack on people that had done nothing but treat her with kindness. The point was repeatedly made when victim impact statements were delivered at sentencing, and also when commentary was given by the judge when he was sentencing Erin Patterson.
Yeah, she's a serious violent offender. Of course, she has always denied any wrongdoing. She's now indicated her intention to appeal. Now the courts have to consider whether an appeal will actually be heard. She feels to me like someone who would take this all the way to the High Court. She's not going to give up, is she?
She's not, because she's got nothing to lose. She's got a lot of money. We heard that throughout the trial. She got an inheritance from her mother and from her grandmother as well. And what's the alternative, right? She's in prison. Either she's going to be in prison for the rest of her life, or she can try and fight it and try and get out. When she does appeal, and she has indicated that she will, what sort of interest do you think will be garnered from the public in that? Or do you think that, are we done with the Erin Patterson saga, or done caring?
I think people have got an endless appetite for this story, but what I find really troubling is why they're so interested in it. And I've felt very conflicted about the kind of entertainment nature of this trial. Of course, we covered it. in huge depth. You blogged every day and wrote stories. We covered it here on the front every day. We've made a lot of videos about it, and we know that people are really interested. But I don't want to sound too judgmental of the audience, but I do feel as though these crimes were not really being taken that seriously. It was kind of like, wow, look at what these, quirky hobbits are doing in the country Victoria. They're poisoning each other with mushrooms. How crazy. In fact, this is just the most disgusting, in my view, domestic violence offending you could possibly imagine. It is. And I don't think we would have any trouble discerning that if she was male and if the weapon had been, a knife or a gun instead of a beef Wellington.
Yeah. And I think that's going back to what the family were saying, right, is that the whole thing became a pantomime of their lives. While I was in Morwell, there was a weekend that I spent in Melbourne, and I went to a stand-up comedy show, and it was in the middle of a trial, and a guy stood up and made a series of jokes about what was going on at the Beef Wellington trial 2 hours away. At risk of contempt of court, which I was just sitting in the audience going, mate, sit down, we're not allowed to do this. But also completely rejecting the fact that there is a family in the middle of this, a family that is experiencing a really, really terrible tragedy. And it's a big question for us as a media organisation. How do you balance the extreme public interest in this? And we know, obviously, criminal trials of this scale are firmly in the public interest. And I think that our coverage of it was justified. But how do you balance that with when the interest is coming from a place of, I don't know, intense glee almost in the nature in which these crimes were committed? I actually don't know the answer.
I hate saying this because I'm generally an advocate for more openness in our justice system, but it does make me glad that our courts are not televised, because otherwise it would have been like the Amber and Johnny trial. People making TikToks every day about what so-and-so had said in the witness box, making fun of people. That would have been even worse.
Yeah, it would have been even worse. And it's the judge in this case was really clamping down on media organisations, or not even media organisations, influencers or whoever, who were posting contemptuous material on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it was, commenting on the case. The way that the trial was reported was very restricted. And I think that that's a good thing, because it doesn't allow for commentary, and it doesn't allow for people to, throw their 2 cents in online in a big way, or those with big audiences to do so, in order to protect her right to a fair trial. But I also think that it has a collateral effect, which is, it hopefully doesn't, become this huge opinion fest in the middle of a trial, and the positive impact that can have on a family.
Yeah, I actually, again, may seriously regret saying this, but I want the courts to throw the book at people who commit a contempt. I've seen now in probably 10 trials since the social media age began, judges getting very angry and saying so-and-so shouldn't have put this on YouTube, or you shouldn't be saying that on Twitter, or you shouldn't say that on the radio or on your podcast. But then there are no consequences. Someone writes a grovelling letter of apology. They never actually get charged with contempt of court, and that means there are no consequences. People on TikTok are not even aware that there are any rules.
And I think that it's frustrating sometimes as a legacy media organisation. We know the rules. I've been in court enough times to know the rules around what I'm allowed to report and what I'm not allowed to report. It's frustrating seeing rogue units go through and say whatever they would like to say online because they don't know the law, and then being called out in front of a judge and saying that somehow their excuse is, well, sorry, I didn't know. Well, it's not good enough. I don't know, in my opinion.
I agree. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.